Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of my Minecraft tutorial series. I apologize for taking so long to get back to you on this, but we are now back and getting into a new episode, and you can be sure to see more from me soon now that I have an editor on the team and some extra builders helping me out. So be sure to subscribe if you want to learn more about how to build all sorts of different styles of houses. And we're also going to be doing some fun different types of videos soon as well. But now let's get into it. So today we are going to be talking about styles. Different styles of houses. What kind of style should you build your house in? Well, it depends on what kind of style you want to build. But there are lots of different styles that we need to talk about. And I'm not going to necessarily get into all the specifics today. That's something we can do in future videos. But we're just going to be talking about thinking what kind of style you should build in and some tips and tricks to go with those particular styles. So let's talk about probably the most common style, which is modern houses, right? So with modern houses, they usually have a very blocky shape, or sometimes they can have rounded, smooth edges. Those are usually taking on more of a sort of futuristic kind of mix with modern sometimes. But the big thing about modern is you want to think about light. Light is probably the most important thing about modern houses. They let a lot of light in and they interplay with light. Okay, so a lot of times modern houses will have big windows to allow lots of light to come in. It's also why they don't have a lot of color, because color kind of distracts from the light. Light is the main focus here. So a lot of times it'll just be grays or blacks and whites, maybe with like a wooden color in the background, rather than, how it was back in the 60s with all these different greens and oranges and all these. This was kind of like modern is going away from that and focusing more on light, whereas back then they focused less on light and more on different color. So when you're building a modern house, be sure to make sharp edges a lot of times, or really smooth edges, but nothing in between. You can't have some kind of in between. We like to have large, jutting out, strong features of architecture, like some of the ones I'm letting you see here, or nice, smooth, rounded parts of architecture, like some of the ones you might see here in these modern houses. So consider that when thinking about what kind of house you want to build. When you're thinking about building a modern house, you need to make sure that it matches the style. Another thing I like to do with styles is I like to actually mix styles together. So I'll have two styles in one house, which will kind of create something interesting. Probably my best example of that is my Japanese castle, which I took inspiration from Japanese castles and mixed it with modern. You can see here, instead of going for sharp edges, I used smoother edges, which work better with the Japanese castle theme. It kind of works as kind of like a gate, and then you have the castle part on top. Instead of trying to blend them together, I take elements and kind of separate the two elements within the build. I think that's kind of the secret to it, is don't try to necessarily blend them together, because usually that doesn't work well, but rather have an element that looks really like Japanese and an element that looks really modern, and put them next to each other in different ways where they work together, because again, sometimes they're not going to work in every single way when they're put together. I've had some houses where they didn't necessarily work as well. My Viking house is probably a pretty good example of that, being a modern house tried to be mixed with a Viking boat, and it kind of just looks a little funky. So I don't know if that's something that I would necessarily prescribe. Anyways, as far as that's concerned, mixing styles is something that you should probably definitely look into, because it's really fun to do. Another kind of style that I really enjoy building is a natural kind of style. There are two ways of doing the natural style, at least the one I'm talking about, which is mixing it in with the environment. Or building like an environmental structure, like something that is shaped like something from the environment, like this Grand Lotus building here, or the Waves building. One of the first builds I did was that Waves building. Another example is something that kind of fits into nature or is built around the nature, which would be this Epic Cliffs is what this house is called here. But what I love about this house is that it's kind of built all over the place, right? So you got different height levels. It's got a bridge that leads across, light coming in from all sorts of different angles depending on what time of day it is. And I know Minecraft, light's not the biggest deal ever because it's not real unless you got that RTX turned all the way up. But yeah, so the lighting isn't necessarily the biggest deal, but we're trying to emulate, right? We're trying to emulate real life houses. But with a touch of fantasy mixed in. That's how I like to think of it, because obviously a bridge across would be probably kind of stupid in a real house. Or this house way up in the cliffs that is suspended by, like, I guess some kind of beam. I tried, as you can see, I make it look as if it could still be possible, but in reality this would be such a ridiculous house. Even if they could build it, they probably should not, for many reasons. But that's why it's fun to do it in Minecraft, because we don't have to worry about physics. So when you're thinking about your style, you do still want to make it look as if it's connected in some way, unless you're going for real pure fantasy, which is fine too. But when you're doing real styles like modern or the natural, you want everything to be connected to the ground. You want to put a beam that goes across and reaches out to create structure and support. You want supports on your house. You don't want just a floating house. So when I did like my Epic Cliffs house, you can see everything has got supports. It's all fit into nature. So depending on how the mountain was, I kind of smoothed it out in certain areas, but then I left other areas untouched. And that makes it really feel like it blends into nature, which is what you want. You want a blend into the surrounding nature. So let's talk about rustic style. Rustic is not my particular best style, but I have a builder who specializes in the rustic style, and here are some of his builds and some of my own as well. And you can see that this style has a lot of small detailing. You want to think of it kind of like the detail is in the different texturing. The texturing is where the detail really comes in with rustic houses. So a lot of times you'll put like little buttons or pressure plates or different blocks that are similar colors next to each other. As you can see, it gives it this real textured look, as if it's worn down or has experienced some sense of time. I do a similar thing with my cyberpunk builds, which I'll show here. And the reason why is that too, I have the like really nice cyberpunk area up top, and then on the bottom side of my city, you see a lot more textured stuff because it gives it the idea that it's been more lived in, that it has age to it. That's kind of what you're thinking of when you're thinking of texturing. So you can do that on buildings you want to, when you're mixing styles, especially if you want like a certain part to look aged, give it a little texture. Use different blocks and kind of mix them all in. Make sure they're similar colors, and you kind of just, when you're doing it, you just build a different one, kind of flip-flop back and forth through different ones. It takes a little bit of getting used to. I use commands to do it nowadays, but if you don't have the luxury of being able to use commands or mods in order to make that process easier for you, it's still possible to do with just regular building, and I'm sure many people still do it or prefer it that way, even though I prefer doing it using world edit commands. So those are just a couple of different styles. Let's talk about some more traditional styles like English style houses or Victorian style houses. These houses, you want to really stick to a more strict building style because that's kind of how they were. Or Greco-Roman, everything's strong, built through these pillars is how I like to think of it. Art Deco takes some of that but then expands it into the sky and uses a lot of different metals. There's lots of different things going on. So one of the best things I can advise you to do is, if you're about to build a building in a style, go and look at pictures of real life buildings in that style. Like, go look at, if you're building a Roman building, go look at different Roman buildings. Here's the Roman building I built. I designed it from scratch. I took a lot of inspiration from real life Roman buildings. I looked up real life Roman buildings. I didn't just, go out there and wing it, because I don't know what a Roman building looks like if I try like that. When we're emulating styles, we can think of that. Looking into what different people have done and creating new styles. Now that's a little more tricky. I like to think that some of my buildings might have some semblance of newness, but in all honesty, they probably are just a mix of different styles. Like, that's how new styles kind of are made, or they're taken from nature or what have you. So yeah, I have some buildings that are definitely unique, like my Waves building, but those are all taken from nature. Or some of my cyberpunk stuff is pretty kind of futuristic and looks uniquely mine. I don't think anyone builds exactly the way I do, but that doesn't mean that it's so unique that it's a new style necessarily, and I'm not necessarily a judger of what makes a new style or how to even come up with a new one these days with so many different things out there. But you can try to come up with something that maybe you haven't seen before using different color palettes, remembering texturing for old versus new. If you want something to look more new, probably don't texture it as much. If you want something to look more old, it's not going to be as clean cut. Those are some of the things you can think about. Lots of shapes, right? What kind of shapes are you going for with it? Do you want, super round, smooth shapes curling around and looking like they're spinning around each other like some kind of galaxy form? Or do you want everything super rigid and square or brutalist and looking powerful? Do you want the energy to come from the ground? Pillars are a great way to make things look powerful. I mean, it's something about drawing your energy from the ground that gives it a certain strength that pillars really help to show. Go look at pictures of buildings where you can see like they have these pillars or corners to them where they're vaulted up, lifted from the ground, versus just a flat building. And you can almost tell exactly what I'm talking about here. It gives it a sense of power and strength, even though technically speaking it should look weaker because less of it is touching the ground, and yet somehow it's vaulted up. It's almost like arms lifting up and reaching and pushing the building up. I think that's how you can think of it, and so those arms give it a sense of strength. So those are some of the things you can be thinking about when you're designing weird futuristic new styles, or just something that maybe there isn't a lot of information on. If you want to go with something that's completely unique, look at the elements, the basic elements that make up each style, and take the elements that you want from that, and you can then mix them together and try to create a new style, because it's those basic elements that make the style in the first place, like material or color or light, glass, windows. How many windows are you going to have? Pillars versus no pillars, versus different shapes, how much of it is touching the ground, how much of it is not touching the ground, all these different things that go into it. You want to be thinking about each one of those things when you're building in a certain style. And again, look at lots of pictures, look at what lots of other people have built. Especially when you're in Minecraft, you're limited, right? In Minecraft, we're limited by the blocks we have. We can only build something within the limitations of the blocks, but people are a lot smarter than me and have figured out really cool and unique ways to use blocks, and I learn from them all the time. I look at other people's builds and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of using that block in that way, and then I learned to use it that way in my same builds. We learn from each other. We take inspiration from each other. It's not copying unless I'm building the exact same building or trying to get as close as possible without it being exactly the same. You know what I'm talking about. That's copying. But not when we take the elements of that and then make our own builds from it, design our own structures from it. So that's what I want to challenge you to do, is design your own structures, design your own builds from elements of different styles. Learn from people. Look up other houses in real life. Look and see where the power is coming from. Like if it's coming from the base of the pillars, does it look like a strong structure? Does it look like a weak structure? How does the structure even make you feel when you look at it? A lot of brutalist structures have that sense of power. They have concrete. I actually really like brutalist buildings, even though I don't think I'd want to live in one, but I really like the use of concrete to give it this sense of strength. It is kind of very empowering. So consider all those things. I'm just giving a couple examples here, but I want you to start thinking like someone who can build, because I don't want to just teach you like step by step, build here, build this block, build that block. Anyone can do that. Anyone will teach that. I want to teach you the elements that make up the building so that you can design and make buildings by yourself without having to need of just building one. Because if you can only build that one building because you're following someone step by step, and then I give you a building that looks sort of similar in a similar style and say build this one without showing you step by step, you won't know how to build it. But if you learn all the different things that make up what a Roman building, for example, should look like, and I say build me a Roman building, you'll know how to do it. So that's what we're going to do. And so I will take different videos looking at just one style. We'll go through one style, but I'll have probably some other videos as well talking about different things, because we talk about landscapes and shapes so far. But I will have more videos talking about the different styles in the future so that we can look at each individual style and figure out how to build in that one in particular. And I'll talk about the different elements that make it up and maybe how you can blend that with other styles as well. So that's something you can look for in the future. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe and check out my new content that's coming up. We're going to be doing some fun videos. Like I said earlier, we're going to be doing some fun videos as well. So definitely be sure to look for that, because I think you'll really enjoy some of the stuff we got coming up. And hopefully this has helped you learn how to build a little bit better, but be sure to learn from other people as well. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. Bye.